Since the beginning of time, when humanity had reached its creation, wickedness has caused us to undermine each other, kill, judge, harm, and refuse to see the value within our fellow neighbor. Throughout history, we see the pride and worries of our own lives resulting in devastation and suffering among our own kinds. Yet, though we have had chances to learn from our mistakes for thousands of years, a worry from the government officials that spread by a population number decided to follow the same path in the 20th century in China. This worry, a worry that was so big, has caused babies to be starved to death, orphans to die in the 100-degree heat, for parents to be brutalized and humiliated by the government authorities in society, and little girls to be drowned in a bucket of water before they get a chance to take their first breath. This was all because of the Chinese Communist Party that didn't know what it was stepping into when it was first created, the one-child policy, between the 1970s and 1980s. In the midst of the large population growth, it has progressed for 30 years. The damage is far greater than anyone could have ever imagined, and is still affecting China to this very day. After the idea of communism spread, Chinese tried to rapidly industrialize, but resulted in the Great Chinese Famine, where millions had died. Despite this, however, the population had grown to an all-time high. By 1970, there were 800 people, and people were beginning to worry another famine would happen. After the communist leader of China, Mao Zedong, died, Deng Xiaoping took over, who highly recommended families to take birth control to decrease fertility rates. By 1978, he encouraged all to have no more than 2 children. In 1979, the one-child policy took varying rules by provinces, but it wasn't necessarily official. By 1980, the whole nation was under control of the policy. In order to make people support this, the communist government brainwashed the Chinese people in propaganda. They put advertisements everywhere to the public eye, like playing cards, posters, and in children's books where there would be happy, perfect families with only one child. It was believed to be the citizens' duty to the country to follow this, and was considered to be an embarrassment if one had more than one. But there were exceptions. If a mother gave birth to a baby who was physically disabled, families were allowed to have another one. This was also the same for rural communities in order to ensure farmers and laborers for the future generations. Ideally, Chinese families would give birth to a boy, but this wouldn't always happen. If a family gave birth to a girl, one could pay a fine to the government and wait a certain amount of years to have a boy. If a family didn't have an excuse to have a second baby, women were forced to have an abortion and sterilization for the government. Because of the one-child policy, there would be about 336 million abortions and 196 million sterilizations. Though many abortionists from this era face grief today, they were taught to be proud of the profession and that it was needed for the country. Sometimes they would face late-term abortions and would have to kill the baby after the delivery. Some were also sent fines, but some families refused to get an abortion. In response to this, the government could cut electricity out of their houses and could even get arrested to go to prison until they agreed to have an abortion. Despite what the government could do to them, some people still had their second child to hide away from the government, but their rebellion wasn't always successful. If the officials found out, they would drown the baby in a bucket of water or would give them medicine that would kill them. Girls would also be given because they were the second born or the family wanted a boy. Many were abandoned like a box of kittens on the street next to grocery markets or fire stations and were tagged with their name and date of birth. It was common for someone to then call the authorities and to then be taken to an orphanage and put on the newspapers to see if there were any takers. Some didn't have information about them at all. Others weren't as fortunate and would be left out on the streets as beggars or found by gang members. Because everyone wanted a boy to carry on the family name, almost all the orphans were girls. Many orphanages were funded by the governments and were in bad condition. Babies would be tied to their cribs to limit movement, and no one would change their diapers, causing bad hygiene, and many weren't expected to live. Because they were considered to be the burdens of China, the government refused to fund any more money to them. Baby girls flooded orphanages across the country with not enough staff who cared, causing many children to suffer from boredom. The staff members were assigned by the government, and because there were so many infants to take care of, there were dying rooms. While some believed it was a fabrication, they would take the unhealthiest babies and put them in a room with no food or water. They would then stay there to be forgotten to die. Other orphanages had no air conditioning and would get up to 100 degrees, where 20% of the baby girls wouldn't make it. After decades of the one child policy rule, the country started to realize their idea had backfired with the population getting too small. In 2016, the Chinese government finally announced that couples were allowed to have two children. However, it didn't do much good. Many weren't financially stable enough or were too busy to have two, and society had also taught them that having kids wasn't a big priority. In 2021, during COVID, China began the three child policy and still is. There are about 30 million more males than females because of the favoritism of genders. This means more bachelors that could then lead to more crime and single men with depression. People are also experiencing not enough people to take care of the elderly in their families. With so many girls abandoned, there have been orphan crises. Many girls were adopted from America, but the process was hard. Because of all the paperwork coming from adoption agencies and across the world, it would take years to adopt just one. Many girls today don't hardly know anything about their origin story or who their biological parents are. Winston Churchill once said, "A nation without a conscience is a nation without a soul, and a nation without a soul is a nation that cannot survive." This was said only 40 years before the Chinese Communist Party enforced the one-child policy, and imagine what could have happened if they would have listened. Instead, however, families are split millions of miles away from each other. Sisters are missing unknown brothers. Brothers are missing unknown sisters. Parents lost a chance to cradle another child in their arms and nurture them with tenderness. Unborn souls and infants with so much potential left this earth way too early without anybody tell them that they're loved, kiss them on the forehead, or hold them tight as they can to move on to the next life. They were alone. Perhaps this devastation can be a wake-up call to show that life isn't just for the lucky, and the worth of humanity of all stages is far greater than we could have ever imagined. It doesn't waver because of the gender, the conditions of the family, the population number of a certain area, or how young the life is. If all of humanity could follow this and look at their fellow man, woman, child, self with this value, maybe there would be no wars, hatred, genocide, invasion, injustice, suicide, or judgment. Maybe we could have erased all the wickedness of the world since the beginning of time when humanity had reached its creation.